you all for coming. We'll start the press conference momentarily. Just want to make a point about how significant we believe it is. And first, everyone can silence their cell phones or other pieces that they have. Second, just how significant we believe it is that these two leading international human rights organizations are coming together to talk about U.S. drone strikes and other airborne killings and the legality of them through the Human Rights Watch report between Drone and Al-Qaeda and through the Amnesty International report, Will I Be Next? In your press kits you have speaker bios and their names and spellings. They'll also give their names as they speak. Afterwards we'll go to questions. When we do that, please wait for the microphone because we are feeding this with the mult, and then state your name and your media organization when you ask. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mustafa.
Thank you, Ben. I'm Mustafa Qadri. I'm the Pakistan researcher at Amnesty International. I carried out research into our report on US drone strikes in Pakistan. On a sunny afternoon in October 2012, a 68-year-old woman, Mamuna Bibi, was killed in a drone strike that appears to have been directly targeted at her. Her grandchildren recounted in painful detail to Amnesty International the moment when she was blown into pieces in front of their very eyes while she was gathering vegetables. Almost a year to the day, her family has yet to receive any acknowledgement from the US that she was killed by one of its drones, let alone any justice or compensation for her killing. Earlier that year, on the 6th of July 2012, 18 male labourers, including at least one young boy, 14-year-old Saleh Khan, were killed by a US drone. In the first strike, 8 men were instantly killed while they were having their dinner after a long, difficult day in the field. As people came to assist them, to see if there were any injured, any survivors, they too were also attacked. Witnesses described to us a macabre scene of body parts and blood, panic and terror as US drones continued to hover overhead. Research in Pakistan's North Waziristan Tribal Agency, where most of the drone strikes occur in Pakistan, is extremely difficult. That is why we've researched as much as we can 9 cases out of the 45 that we identified between January 2012 and August 2013. We tried our very hardest to stick to the facts. We tried to corroborate the information we gathered and to analyze it against satellite imagery, photographs, video, and other sources. The most challenging situation we had to face was the complete and utter secrecy of the US authorities. Because of that, we cannot be 100% certain, but we are extremely concerned that these and other killings documented in our report may constitute extrajudicial executions or war crimes. We are also extremely concerned about armed groups operating in North Waziristan. These are some of the most dangerous people, and the Pakistani authorities have not done enough to get these perpetrators, to bring them to justice and fair trials without recourse to the death penalty. The Pakistani authorities have also failed to protect their citizens and people in North Waziristan from drone strikes, or to enforce their rights to justice and reparation after falling victim to these strikes. We are also concerned that the Pakistani authorities or aspects of the institutions may also be assisting the US to carry out drone strikes that may constitute human rights violations. So we call on the Pakistani authorities to meet their obligations too. Drones may have given the US unrivaled access to one of the most remote and lawless parts of the world, but immediate security concerns, real or perceived, must not and cannot be addressed by trampling on the rights of people in Pakistan's tribal areas. And just very lastly, I would like to thank most of all the many, many people in the tribal areas because of whom this report is possible. These are people who sacrificed a great deal, who risked their own lives to try to tell us the truth about what is happening to them in that region. And while we sit here in Washington, D.C., with the Prime Minister of Pakistan meeting the President of the United States, staying in a hotel very close to this building, let's not forget the people on the ground who are affected by drones and the situation more broadly.
Hi, my name is Letta Taylor. I'm the senior terrorism. My name is Letta Taylor. I'm the senior terrorism and counterterrorism researcher at Human Rights Watch, and I authored this report between Drone and Al-Qaeda and conducted much of the research. This is about targeted killings in Yemen. Since 2009, the United States has carried out an estimated 80 targeted killing operations in Yemen. These are part of its effort to quash Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which President Obama describes as one of the most active branches of Al-Qaeda. These strikes have killed an estimated 473 people, yet the U.S. has only publicly acknowledged 2 of these strikes, those that have killed Americans. It's as if the hundreds of Yemenis killed in these attacks simply never existed. The Yemeni government has provided very few details itself. It is a strong supporter of the drone strikes. This year and last, Human Rights Watch went to Yemen to find out who some of these Yemenis are who are being killed. And we found that despite assurances from President Obama that it's doing its utmost to protect civilians from harm, that in fact, in many cases, it is killing innocent civilians, even dozens of them, if not more. 2 of the 6 cases that we examine in my report show that the U.S. indiscriminately killed civilians. This is a clear violation of international law, even if it was not the U.S. intent. If it indiscriminately killed, it should be held responsible. In addition, 2 of the cases in which we found indiscriminate killings were in Al-Majala, a hamlet in southeast Yemen, where U.S. cruise missiles fired cluster munitions on an alleged Qaeda training camp. That attack killed 14 alleged militants, but it also killed 41 Bedouins asleep in their tents. 2/3 of them were women and children. To this day, the U.S. has not acknowledged that attack. It has not apologized. It has not compensated the civilians. In another strike we examined in a hamlet outside of the central city of Rada, a U.S. drone-assisted strike killed 12 people in a passenger van. The target of that strike was an alleged AQAP militant, but that target was nowhere in sight. It turned out that all 12 people killed were villagers coming home from market. Their loved ones found their charred bodies in pieces on the roadside, dusted in flour and sugar that they were bringing home to their families. We also found evidence that the U.S. was either killing disproportionate numbers of civilians or killing suspects who might not have been valid military targets under the laws of war. But legal violations, while they're our main concern, are not the only issue here. We also found that President Obama's policy guidelines, which he unveiled last May on targeted killings, were not followed in many of these strikes. The White House has not said when these policies went into effect, but it did say that some already had been implemented. We found 4 cases of civilians being killed in these strikes, despite President Obama's statement that the U.S. only strikes when there is near certainty that no civilians will be harmed. We also, in the case of the villagers coming home from market, found that the U.S. was striking even if the target was not present. We also found cases where the U.S. was not capturing targets when feasible, although Obama said the preference is always to capture rather than kill. We found 3 such cases where it would have been easy to capture. Some of these strikes also were just simply counterproductive. In one village called Kashmir, the U.S. killed 3 alleged militants, but it also killed a cleric who preached against Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and his cousin, one of the village's few police officers. That is, I think, you can't get much more counterproductive than that. The U.S. has a legal obligation to provide compensation for these, for unlawful civilian deaths and injuries. Yet we found no evidence in Yemen that the U.S. has compensated victims of unlawful strikes, the families of victims of unlawful strikes. After Human Rights Watch and other organizations began pressing U.S. and Yemeni authorities on these strikes and on the compensation issue, the Yemenis began compensation payments, but we found these to be haphazard and inadequate in most cases. All of this leaves the Yemenis fearing the United States. In fact, many Yemenis told us they now fear the United States more than they fear Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. These strikes are also stoking anger. In the villages where people are hit, every man, woman, and child has seen images of charred bodies, of body parts, of vehicles that are turned into twisted masses, as in this report cover. One relative, and they feel helpless because the US refuses to acknowledge these strikes. As one relative told me, we Yemenis are the ones who pay the price of the war on terror. He said, we are caught between a drone on one hand and Al-Qaeda on the other.
Good morning, my name is Andrea Prasso. I'm the Senior Counterterrorism Counsel and Advocate for Human Rights Watch. You've heard tremendous details from the two authors of these new reports, including Human Rights Watch's report, Between a Drone and Al-Qaeda. I'd like to put their comments in a little bit of context. We're here today to talk about unlawful killings. We are not here to call for an end to the drone program, nor are we saying that drones themselves are unlawful weapons. In fact, we recognize that at times drones may be more protective of human life than other types of weapons. But both reports detail unlawful killings, and we have examined only a handful of cases out of the hundreds of drone strikes and other airstrikes that have taken place in Yemen, and of course in Pakistan, Somalia, and perhaps elsewhere. And we did so in a relative vacuum of information. Human Rights Watch examined strikes that the US government has not publicly acknowledged, and we did so in a murky legal context. The US government has not been clear about its perceived legal authority, nor has it been clear about its policies. President Obama's speech in May was a big step forward, but it was a speech detailing policy, not law. And it did not explain when the policies had been implemented. As Letta discussed, we documented cases where the policy clearly had not been followed. What we don't know is whether the policy was in fact in place and simply wasn't followed, or perhaps learning lessons from some of the strikes we've documented, the Obama administration decided to implement new policies. We documented cases where intended targets could have been arrested, civilians were killed when the targets were killed, and if the target had been arrested, those civilian casualties would likely have been avoided. We also don't know the full details of the policy, because while the public has received a fact sheet, and we did hear details about the policy from the president in May, the actual policy is classified. Only certain members of Congress have seen it. So while the public policy does outline some steps that would protect human life more than previous practice, we don't know all of the details. The US government has also refused to disclose who it believes it's at war with. The US has said it's in an armed conflict with Al-Qaeda and associated forces, but has not disclosed who those associated forces are. So the United States has a set of secret rules about when it can kill its enemies and a secret list of those enemies. During the heightened security threat in August, the US conducted 9 drone strikes in Yemen, and an anonymous official publicly claimed that the policy was not being applied. What kind of policy is that if it can simply be tossed out the window during a security threat? So we today are calling for increased transparency from the Obama administration, both with respect to the overall legal authority for target killings, as well as how the law and the president's policy interact. And we're doing so in the context of significantly increased interest in targeted killings. In addition to the reports that are being released today, 2 United Nations reports will be presented to the General Assembly on Friday. They're available publicly now. And both are critical of the United States targeted killing policies, and in particular, call for significantly increased transparency. Not only for the population inside the US, which deserves to know what its government is doing, for US lawmakers, but for the international population, the Yemenis, the Pakistanis, the Somalis, and people around the world who deserve to know what law and policies are being applied. Keep in mind that the United States is not the only nation that has drones. Drones are proliferating, and the failure to abide by international law now by the United States will set a dangerous precedent for other nations to also disregard it. We have meticulously documented civilian deaths from airstrikes in both Pakistan and Yemen, and given a voice to some of the victims. But it should not require this much effort. The United States, Pakistan, and Yemen all have essential information about these strikes they should disclose to the public, and make things right. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Noreen Shah. I'm an advocacy advisor with Amnesty International USA. This young girl has never received an explanation for the drone strike that killed her 68-year-old grandmother while she was picking vegetables in a large family field. We have presented evidence today of potentially unlawful killings. And in light of this evidence, we are calling on President Obama to immediately commit to ensuring investigations of these cases and of all other potentially unlawful killings. We are also asking Congress, and in particular the Senate and House Intelligence and Armed Services Committees, to ensure that there are independent and full investigations into these cases. It is time to end the black hole of accountability for drone strikes. The U.S. has acted like a hit-and-run driver, refusing to take responsibility for the killings of a 68-year-old woman and a 14-year-old boy, among others. Aided by the lawless and remote regions where drone strikes are occurring, the U.S. government has adopted a policy of extreme secrecy about who is being killed. This failure to acknowledge killings is not tenable. The U.S. government has never committed to investigating these cases or the cases that over the years journalists and human rights organizations have presented. In effect, the Obama administration has sought to evade accountability by promising that its policies have already improved. This trust us approach to the law, so evident in the recent NSA surveillance scandal, is also manifesting here with the added gravity of life and death. Investigations would break the trust us paradigm. They would put a stop, or at least they would pause the cycle of abuse, impunity, and secrecy of the Obama administration. It is true that there's misinformation about drone strikes, that this is a politically driven issue, and that makes it difficult for observers to determine the veracity of any claims about who is being killed. Amnesty International even documented cases in which, after strikes, armed groups recovered dead bodies and shifted them to unknown locations, impeding identification of those killed. This underscores the need for the U.S. government to commit to independent, comprehensive investigations of what is happening on the ground, not merely post-strike assessments. Where violations are found, the U.S. government must bring the personnel responsible to fair and public trials without recourse to the death penalty. Even where killings are not found to meet a threshold of illegality under international law, families and survivors still should be compensated where civilians are killed. The Obama administration's disclosures so far have provided a veneer of transparency to a program that still remains fundamentally secretive and unaccountable. It is time for the Obama administration to come clean about unlawful drone killings and to end its policy of secrecy.
Thank you, Noreen, and to all the panelists. Again, if you please wait for the microphone and then state your name and your news agency.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Chris Sheridan from Al Jazeera English. Question for you. Do you believe the Pakistani government gave permission to the United States for these drone strikes?
You mean about the strikes during the period of our research, or
Yes,
broadly?
any of them. Yes.
Yeah, well, so we obviously don't have any concrete evidence of that. As we mentioned in the report, some serving and retired security officials claimed that the relationship was still ongoing, but we've got no concrete evidence of that. In any event, this area is so lawless and can be easily accessed from Afghanistan that that kind of assistance is not necessary for it to continue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me, Sam Husseini from IPA Media. You're calling for transparency here, and I want to make sure that what I'm hearing from you is transparent. The first speaker seemed to say that this may constitute extrajudicial killing, and you, Ms. Taylor, said that these are clear violations of international law, if I heard you. So, are they extrajudicial killings? Are they clear violations of international law? And if so, who is guilty? These are presumably therefore war crimes. Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, I believe, have not been shy about calling out other leaders of other countries for war crimes. Are you shy now?
I think we'll both need to answer this because just to make it clear, we carried out our research independently, and while we share many conclusions, the conclusions about the specific strikes are specific to those strikes. So in our case, which is distinct from Amnesty, we find two clear cases of violations of the laws of war, violations but not reaching the level of war crimes, which is a different category. We also find strong evidence in the other four cases we examined of violations of the laws of war, but we're not calling them, we're not 100% sure, precisely because the Obama administration will not give us access to the additional information. That's why we want them investigated. So that's from our perspective. We do not make calls about extrajudicial executions, and nor do we raise the issue of war crimes in the specific report.
Yeah, look, I'm actually really glad you mentioned that question. To be very clear, we didn't pull any punches in this work. I can only talk about Pakistan. The area that we're talking about is so remote that we have to rely as much as we can on our primary sources, but even with that, there's a lot of information we don't know. So we were very sure to be very careful in analysing this, and in some of the cases we've looked at, certainly when it comes to rescue attacks and other cases that we've looked at, they appear to be war crimes. But really the full picture is for the US authorities to reveal. We're saying for the US authorities to come clean. But this is not an issue about us trying to be, careful about what we say. This is us saying that we need to be looking at this, uncover this very objectively. And we are very concerned about these cases being war crimes.
But when you have an African despot who's you said is guilty of war crimes, you don't wait for him
I
to
can't
reveal
comment
what
about
his
African
state
despots.
policy
I haven't
is.
researched African despots. I've researched Pakistan.
Can I just add, there's a legal difference between a violation of international law and an extrajudicial execution. So we've all identified violations of international law.
In the blue sweater, please.
My name is Lorenzo Miller from Television of Spain. Given that President Obama, when he's not president, when he was a senator or a person, and probably Hillary Clinton or other people in the administration are willing to listen to you as citizens, have you contacted them? Is anybody in the administration talking to you, using your data? I don't know, they find it useful to give compensations or to following up or whatever?
Human Rights Watch contacted Yemeni and US officials. I think Mustafa should speak to what Amnesty did. So we contacted both US and Yemeni authorities for comment, and neither government replied to our numerous letters, emails, and telephone calls. We did get one response actually from the CIA, which said talk to the White House, which did not return requests for comment, did not respond to requests for comment.
And just on Pakistan, very similar sort of a situation. We got one response in writing from the CIA exactly on the same terms. Maybe they even just copied the same letter. The Pakistani authorities did meet us. We met with military officials, the foreign ministry, the authorities in charge of the tribal areas and the governor of that province. They were very helpful to us. They were very forthright. Unfortunately, though, they did not provide us with statistics about what they know to be casualty figures, other information. In terms of the US authorities, we've got nothing. We have not received any information from them. We've had some cordial meetings, but in terms of facts, the Pakistani authorities have been much more forthright than the American authorities.
Yeah, I would like to add on that actually. The Yemeni authorities have spoken to us some off the record and have been helpful in providing information.
Thank you. Dan Roberts from The Guardian. Just to follow up on that really, I wondered if you could, both Mustafa and Letta, tell us a little bit more about whether you were able to cross-check or verify the primary interviews you did in any way. I mean, given the difficulties you just explained in terms of getting any help from the Americans, were there any documentary evidence you were able to get hold of, or secondary sources that allowed you to sort of give you confidence that when people were saying these were civilians, that they were indeed civilians?
Yeah. First. I think that's a really good question. So we basically, for every case that we researched, we had different teams set up. We spoke to multiple different eyewitnesses. We had some secondary witnesses, those who, for example, may have heard the noise of the strike, seen some of the victims, seen the grave sites. We did all those interviews independent of one another to corroborate. We then had photographic, video, satellite imagery evidence to corroborate against that. There in the tribal areas isn't much documentary evidence. The one thing that we really have is a letter of the Pakistani authorities promising to provide compensation to one family. The grandmother case in which they provided $100 equivalent. That's the only case that we could find of anyone getting any compensation. But one thing to really stress is that with a lot of hard work, we actually have based this research on people physically visiting the locations of strikes, talking to eyewitnesses, and not just one interview or one person doing an interview, but multiple interviews, and by people who actually visit these areas, normal people who visit these areas regularly, and for years have been sending human rights information to Amnesty, and not just on drugs, on, for example, the treatment of women, on abuses by the Taliban, that sort of a thing. So we really tried very hard to make sure that we were very confident with the information we were getting before we made our claims.
And yes, I would say we did the same type of research, cross-checking information, speaking to multiple sources, checking video and photos, and when we had videos and photographic evidence, we would then check them with sources who knew the areas well, who we trusted, to confirm that they were indeed from the site in question. As with Amnesty, we have sources who we trust, who we've worked with over the years, who've worked with us on an array of issues, and they were able to confirm much of this information for us and help us find contacts. And we did not rely on one single organization. We went through various tribes, people of various political and ideological stripes to get the information that's in this report.
I'd just like to add that while we're very confident in our findings, it's incumbent upon the Obama administration, if they happen to disagree with a particular finding, to demonstrate why it's not accurate. And they've certainly failed to do so to date.
Jaffer with Al-Mayadeen TV. The recurring theme here is that this report is critical, and it is PC correct in this town to be critical of the administration. However, is being critical sufficient, adequate to allay the fears of those victims? They really couldn't care less whether the Obama administration or the US policy, by and large, is violating war crimes, or violating the laws of war, that is. They consider it probably somewhere on the level of being a criminal. On the other hand, how does a report, that is, justify the drone war as being a violation of someone's sovereignty? Now, is the sovereignty in this question, whether it's in Pakistan or Yemen, is that part of the critique that the report is going to? Is that a violation of war crimes, or is it something else?
I think perhaps a few of us may have a couple of different thoughts, so I'll go very quickly. On the sovereignty issue, that's not something we get into in the Yemen report, but President Hadi of Yemen is a big fan of drones. He's a military man. He's actually said, may come to the effect of, I love drones. And we, again, do not take a position against drones.
But his
Some
people
in
did.
Yemen do, however,
The
question.
Yemeni people did take a position
Some,
against that.
some people in Yemen and have questioned whether President Hadi, who is an interim president, really has the authority to allow the U.S. into Yemen. We raised that question in our report, but it's not the topic that we cover here. We are not looking at the sovereignty issue in this report. That's not to say it's not a valid question. It's a very valid question, but it's not one we examine in this report. I think I'll defer to the others on that.
Well, the purpose of this report is not simply to be critical. I think we have been quite critical because we've identified unlawful killings. And what we're calling for is increased transparency and very specific investigations into the unlawful killings that we've identified, both so that the people involved, the people who've suffered in those strikes, can have some form of understanding of what happened, that people can be held accountable, and also we hope that those investigations will help shape the Obama administration's policy going forward.
Thank you. Karen? Oh, Karen?
Johnson from NPR. It seems as if the incidents of drone strikes have actually gone down in recent months over the last couple of years, so the timing of your reports is interesting in a way. I wonder if you're not trying to just send a message to the Obama administration, but trying to chart a course for future executive branch officials.
Drone strikes have ebbed and flowed in the past, and in fact, there's been a lot of news about one capture and one attempted capture of alleged militants. It's too early to tell whether there's a change in policy. If there is a change in policy and it's one that more clearly follows the law, that's fantastic news. For now, we want to ensure that these strikes, if they continue, are lawful and do their utmost to protect civilians. And any change in policy does not change the fact that the innocent people unlawfully killed in many of the strikes we document are entitled to compensation. They're entitled to redress, and we're not seeing that coming from the U.S.
And as you say, Carrie, our recommendations are directed at the Obama administration and at Congress, but that's because President Obama is the current president. But this is about U.S. policy now and in the future.
Can I just add that, drone technology is proliferating rapidly. And the US government should be careful about the signal that it's sending to the rest of the world. Is killing people with drone technology, with impunity, with secrecy, with a failure of any accountability, the message that the Obama administration wants to send to all other governments that will acquire this technology?
Jonathan Lopez for Politico. Noreen, I had a question for you. You in particular mentioned that the Obama administration has a black hole of accountability, and you drew an explicit reference to the NSA surveillance programs. I was wondering if you could maybe expand on that and say whether you think that the black hole of accountability might extend to the entire national security apparatus within the Obama administration, or greater parts of it than just drone strike policy.
It's been almost half a year since President Obama made a major national security address pledging increased transparency on drone strikes and on other national security issues. And since then, we have not seen any new information from the Obama administration. We're asking President Obama to come clean about who the US government is killing, not just to make a pledge of transparency or make a promise that things are going right, but to say who has been killed, how many people have been killed, and what the legal and factual justification for these killings was.
Yeah, I'm Kumar from Amnesty International. Just a general question for all of you. As you are aware, US publishes annual human rights report on country conditions. Have they mentioned in Pakistan or in Yemen about these killings? Because these are killings that took place on the ground. Have they completely shut off this information? You may know better because you're a researcher for Pakistan, Yemen too. If not, will you take that as an issue to make sure that at the next human rights report that's going to be released in February, mention this. Thank you.
I'll be very quick. That's a very good point. As far as I'm aware off the top of my head, no, we haven't seen any information of theirs. I mean, let's be clear, they've not even acknowledged that they're carrying out, the approximately 330 to 364 strikes that have been carried out in Pakistan alone. So for a reference to be in the human rights report, unlikely. It's certainly a good idea. But the thing is, not just on this report, but more broadly, look, we realize there are real threats out there, but at least as a first step, we're asking for much more than this, but acknowledge these strikes. Tell us, what are you doing and why?
It's been a few months since I've looked at the latest U.S. counterterrorism annual report, but to my recollection, no, there is not. There are a line or two about U.S. having counterterrorism operations in Yemen, but I don't recall that specifically. I will definitely ask for that in the next report, but I think more important than acknowledging something like this in a report is that the U.S. actually take action to change unlawful policies.
So thank you very much for coming today. Both reports are available online. The HRW report is at hrw.org. The Amnesty report is at amnesty.org. The authors and the analysts are all available for interview through their respective organizations. If you have any issues getting in touch with them, feel free to call us at 202-776-7700 or to email my colleague Gabe at westendstrategy.com. Thank you all very much.